Hello and welcome to PopHealth Week on Healthcare Now Radio. I'm your Get Her Done co-host and executive producer, Greg Masters, steering the ship at Health Innovation Media. With me in our cutting-edge virtual studio is the dynamic co-founder and principal co-host of PopHealth Week, Fred Goldstein. He's also the driving force behind Accountable Health LLC as its president. PopHealth Week is where the magic happens. It's where industry frontrunners from diverse sectors like payers, providers, patients, vendors, and regulators come together to exchange top-notch strategies and insights in population health management. Want to get in touch? Swing by www.popupstudio.productions or give me a shout-out on Twitter at GregMastersMPH, and remember that's Greg with 2 G's. Or connect with Fred Goldstein via FS Goldstein on Twitter and www.accountablehealthllc.com. Today we are thrilled to chat with Jeffrey Hogan, the visionary president of Upside Health Advisors and the co-founder of the Moving to Value Alliance. On today's show, we dive into the pivotal role of brokers and consultants in the health benefits procurement journey. Especially in smaller self-funded groups, HR managers often lean on this expertise even when transparency and analytics might be sparse. Stay updated with Jeff's initiatives at theupsideeffect.com. And now, let's dive right in. Over to you, Fred.
Thanks so much, Greg. And Jeff, welcome to PopHealth Week.
Thanks so much. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to get you on. We're actually here at the Health Benefits Nation Conference. Obviously, you've had a major role to play in healthcare around the country with your work, so why don't you give our audience a little sense of your background?
Sure. I am the president of Upside Health Advisors, work primarily in payment reform and care transformation across the healthcare ecosystem. I've been in healthcare for 38 years. The most interesting thing about my background is that I've been in pretty much every area of the healthcare ecosystem, working with providers and health systems and big employers and Taft-Hartley groups and state governments and what have you. I spent 30 years managing New England for a large general agency with roughly $1 billion of commercial premium or premium equivalent. And I've spent 25 years with my health consultancy and advisory focused really on the supply side of healthcare, which is really important right now.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people say they're in healthcare benefits advising or consulting or brokerage services, but I look at what you've done over the years and how you look at this is very unique. Can you talk a little bit about that and sort of how you approach this area?
Sure. So I had the opportunity to work with employers for many, many years, and it really wasn't until about 6 or 7 years ago that people started to focus on healthcare value specifically. Instead of looking at things reactively, we look at the fact that roughly 18% of our GDP is devoted to healthcare. And are we getting value from that 18%? The answer is really no, that we have very fragmented care and non-integrated care, and our outcomes are extremely variable. So over the course of the last 6 or 7 years, focusing on the supply side of healthcare in particular and focusing on outcomes and access to care really seems to be important. And particularly now with the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, where we're asking plan fiduciaries to really pay attention and to be accountable for how they spend money on their beneficiaries and their beneficiaries' money. This has come to the fore. So we're in our glory right now, finally kind of fixing this stuff, looking at populations for their specific needs and apportioning the right resources to them.
And before we get into some of it more in depth, can you talk a little about the CAA and what that actually is and what it means for some of the people in the audience who may not know?
Sure. The Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021 basically imposes new responsibilities on the named fiduciaries for every employer. So it doesn't matter if it's a small group or a middle market group or a large group. There is a named fiduciary who is responsible for how contracts are made and how money is spent out of that plan. It's not dissimilar to the same thing that was imposed about 17 years ago upon retirement plans, when we saw tremendous abuses in costs, where we apportioned all kinds of ridiculous costs, front end, back end, in the middle, all around, and we didn't provide a great product or a solution for beneficiaries. Same thing is occurring now with the Consolidated Appropriations Act. So by the end of this year, employers actually have to attest that they've removed gag clauses from their contracts that prevent them from seeing what they're spending on healthcare services. Imagine that. Most employers don't know what they're spending on healthcare services, and there's very little accountability. So CAA demands that they kind of understand this and that they appropriately contract for services on behalf of their beneficiaries.
So plans will have to begin to look at the data that they're getting either through their TPA or whatever and say, hey, we're making wise decisions about that, or we're in trouble potentially.
Yeah, this is the key. Data and analytics is really important. And if we look historically, particularly in the commercial health markets, we know that most employers have really gotten bad analytics on their data. Most often, the employer designates the HR director to go out and procure or to buy health services or to buy the health plan. And they, in turn, convey that responsibility to a broker or consultant who receives compensation from health plans and other parties. And now, under this new arrangement, the named fiduciary is responsible for getting their data. Imagine that, actually knowing what things cost, what they should cost, and more importantly, what they could cost if they paid attention to it in an accountable fashion.
And as I understand it, employees can then say, hey, we think this is not being handled responsibly, and do something about that from a legal perspective?
Correct. And it's, again, the analogy goes back to retirement plans. We've had 17 years of class action lawsuits for breach of fiduciary duty, where plaintiffs' attorneys have acted on behalf of classifications of employees or employee groups or others who feel that their money has not been spent responsibly, and go out and create a breach of fiduciary duty lawsuit. So there's a lot of experience in this space, and the plaintiffs' attorneys are just salivating for the opportunity in the healthcare space.
And so along with that, what you've sort of done over the years has been rather innovative. You work with some really large plans from states, et cetera, and I assume as well with smaller plans. What do you really look for? What sort of advice are you giving these plans so that they can be successful? Everyone's talking about how they try to do this. We're not making any progress, but you've been able to show some progress in that. What are you doing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Even down to the small group level right now, there are products in the marketplace that will furnish employers with data and analytics on utilization and what have you. And there are things that employers can do in their own communities. So we have the RAND Hospital Transparency Report, which will show an employer in a particular geographic area which health systems are charging too much and have bad quality, and that there's spending on that. So being able to get data and analytics in the hands of even the smallest employer seems to inspire them. For most employers that self-fund their health plans, we have level-funded plans down to 20 lives now in the marketplace. The largest fixed cost they have in their plan is for stop loss. And if, in fact, we can provide them with data and analytics that shows them that they're paying 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 times what they should, for those high volume services, knee replacements and hips and shoulders and cabbages and colonoscopies and things like this. If we can show them that they can finance their plans in an appropriate fashion by looking at their data and looking at their analytics, they change their behavior. They act in a fiduciary capacity, and actually what they do is to recapture capital back from their plan that can go to wages and be apportioned to otherwise.
How difficult is that to do? Everybody talks about it. These brokers come in, they say, hey, we're going to help you get the best plan. This is going to save you money. And then they see the next year their premiums go up and their premiums go up.
It's really hard at the beginning. So most of the commercial health data and analytics companies that are out there in the marketplace do not furnish analytics back to an employer which says, this is your biggest problem. You're paying this hospital system 500 or 600 or 700% of Medicare with bad quality. They don't show that cancer is, their largest issue, or in fact that there's no precision associated with it, or in fact that MSK is number 2 and everybody is going to be cut. So there hasn't been this level of analytics in the past that is actionable, that shows them actually what they should be working on. That's changed. So with CAA, we are seeing folks come into the marketplace now that are really providing great analytics. They're actually going back and looking at retrospective claims data 2, 3, 5, 10 years and showing the fiduciary how poorly they have financed the plan and what the opportunity is to fix that appropriately. Number one. Number two, we're also seeing the supply side of healthcare change dramatically. So we see in the marketplace, and I talked about it today in one of our panels, this new tech-enabled advanced primary care model come to the fore. And everybody is investing in this. And basically, especially with the Consolidated Appropriations Act, this allows an employer to attribute advanced primary care to their beneficiaries in a capitated total cost of care rubric of accountability for the employers. Why is this so important suddenly? Because we have a convener. We have someone who is ultimately responsible for comorbidities, care paths, longitudinal care, even the point solutions that are all out there in the marketplace that employers hate, to integrate into their care paths to manage total cost of care appropriately.
So we've got all these different names for primary care, right? So give me a definition of what an advanced primary care is.
It's a really great question. So about 3 years ago, just to try and give some credibility to my answer, 3 different organizations, credible organizations, the Purchasers Business Group on Health, the Primary Care Collaborative, and the National Alliance of Healthcare Purchasers came together and said, this is what the tech-enabled advanced primary care paradigm model looks like. Number one, that they have gone through payment reform, that they can handle total cost of care on a budget for a specific capitated cost per member per month. Number one.
For those just hopping on board, we're in the delightful company of Jeffrey Hogan, the trailblazing president of Upside Health Advisors and co-founder of the Moving to Value Alliance. Let's continue the journey.
And let me ask you a question on
Sure.
that. When you say total cost of care, do you mean global cap?
Yep.
For that population? Mm-hmm. So they're responsible for the primary care expenses and all the rest that flows through into the system.
Correct.
Great.
That is what constitutes payment reform in a paradigm model. Doesn't mean that's what's happening in the marketplace, but there are instances where this is happening in the marketplace. Number one. Number two, that they're utilizing an integrated practice unit. What is that?
Exactly.
That is, wonkish healthcare language, but it's really important. What is an integrated practice unit? And especially as it relates to primary care, when we know no one is going into primary care in the med schools, it means that we can service this population. And it's really important that we're talking about populations that we're servicing here with a team. So the primary care physician is the tip of the spear for the team and manages primarily heavy comorbidities, complex care, and what have you. The advanced practice RN, the APRNs, 1 or 2 per team, are handling most of the clinical duties. It also includes a PharmD as part of the team and a behaviorist or more as part of the team. Generally, we also see specific health coaches who are involved as part of this integrated practice unit. So that is that's the type of thing GenMed, Iora, others use this type of team in the marketplace, and it seems to work pretty well out there. So that's part of the paradigm model. Second part, the care transformation means that this advanced primary care organization can handle longitudinal care, all the care coordination necessary with specialists and others, maybe point solutions as well for the total cost of care. And the third part, I think, is really important. It's the consumer aspect, that the organization uses patient-reported outcomes and uses net promoter scores to talk about their behavior or their interaction with this patient as a consumer. So it's a really interesting model, and we've seen variations of it out there. Some of the larger organizations, the CVSs and the Walgreens and what have you, are now using a pharmacist as part of this care model as well. But the integrated practice unit is a new thing. Why is it important? The scarcity of primary care physicians and using more of a relevant team to deal with the population-based issues of a group. And it's why it's also critical with this advanced primary care organization that they have really good data on the population, so we can break down comorbidities, we can do prevalence and acuity, and all kinds of really important things. This is where we de-risk employer populations and we align the interests of the supply side with the population we're servicing.
Right, and you're providing, in essence, you are doing population health through this practice. And when somebody puts this in, what would you expect to see as outcomes?
It's a really good question, and the bottom line is immediately we see agency. That's the best answer that I could give you, where in the past we may see all kinds of fragmentation. The whole notion is here, when the advanced primary care organization looks at the population data, that they are working with that fiduciary who suddenly has to say, this is what matters most. These are the things that have not worked in the past. Let me give you some examples of that. So, for example, on the pharmacy side, we know that med pharmacy, J and Q codes, can vex populations from a cost point of view. We know that in certain areas, catastrophic claims for cancer, chemo, at 225 or 250, 275,000 for that episode that hit the stop loss. These may be the most important things. Can we set up site of care freestanding infusion as part of our service? Can we get data relative to the 2% of the population who's consuming the specialty drugs on the PBM side and the med pharmacy side to determine efficacy of those drugs? Are we creating accountability for those types of things? So the answer is aligning the strategies of the population, the employer, with the strategies of the advanced primary care organization for specific outcomes. And it's a little bit at a time. We see many employers will say, MSK is the second largest cost category. This is the easiest thing for us to tackle in the first year. We need you to bring on board a point solution who can manage low and medium acuity MSK so they don't end up at the orthopod getting cut. So it is all over the place at this point, and it's really dependent on the area that a particular group is in, because we know there's more variation in cost and quality in specific areas. That is why advanced primary care can come to an employer and promise things that often the health plan cannot do themselves with their open network.
Right. And you've sort of covered this primary care model. You've talked about, it seems like each one of these then would sort of be a one-off based on the data. You're taking the data in. So you mentioned MSK. How do you solve for that whole specialist other area that can consume huge dollars?
Yeah, it's, I'll speak to the state that I live in, which is Connecticut. 169 towns and cities, each of which do everything differently, and I'm fond of referring to Connecticut as the land of frozen molasses. Nothing changes, although suddenly we have 6 big national advanced primary care organizations who have moved into the state and are buying legacy primary care groups to do what we're describing here. So specifically on MSK, if we look often for employers and we look at their population data, MSK is the second cost category after cancer that is hitting their stop loss or considered catastrophic claims. Why? We have huge variation for arthroplasty. It's easy, and every employer can look at their group, and it's expensive. I have seen in my own state and other states that we've worked in that a knee that should cost $22,500 costs $100,000. Why? They pay the $22,500 and then they bill for the infection and the complication that costs $75,000. And this is not unusual if we look at the data. So specifically for MSK, low and medium acuity can be resolved often with a point solution if it is integrated appropriately to deal with strains and sprains, and we can deal with it episodically with a point solution, even some physical therapy and what have you. As it relates to arthroplasty, creating APMs, bundles, targeted price and warranted episodes of care for arthroplasty solves that variability problem. So it's much easier than dealing with cardiometabolic or cancer and what have you, which have many complexities associated with it. But MSK is kind of the easiest cost category for an employer to tackle.
And do you look at anything like centers of excellence or things like that and build those into this model as you take it out to employers?
Sure. So the whole center of excellence concept is a good one, but we're finding now that we can build nuance into these APMs. So what does that mean? If you look at an organization, which I really like, Carum Health, who focused on MSK specifically, what do? They create episodes of care, but they look specifically at each of the orthopods, their costs, their quality, their outcomes, the variances of their outcomes, and some get excluded. They create something of a marketplace and say, if you want to earn into this model, your outcomes have to be better, and so do your costs. So there's suddenly a diligence coming to this APM process. Just to give you an example, an underlying example, Professor Porter and Kaplan at Harvard started, and I believe it was both of them helped to start this company called Avant-Garde Health. And Avant-Garde Health will go into a health system and a service line, and they'll do an analysis called TDABC, time-driven activity-based costing, to see exactly the precision of the care path, every aspect of care that's touch device, and the outcome as well, to make sure that the right apportioned resources are being brought to it to assure a warranted outcome. So it's pretty cool, some of the stuff that's happening out there right now.
So we've got a few minutes left here. You've talked about the clinical side, the provider side. What about the benefits side? What do you do on that to ensure the quality, utilization, et cetera? How are you playing in that area?
Yeah, so the benefit side, I think, is going to be the hardest side. We have, for years and years, as I was describing earlier, we've assigned this procurement process to HR folks. And, they're really great folks, but they're not necessarily trained in finance or, risk management or even procurement, for that matter. And we've conveyed that duty to brokers who, often are receiving compensation for placing a group with a specific health plan and retaining it there, even if they're not doing a really good job. So this whole process, one, is changing, has to change. Why? Because this named fiduciary, who's often the CFO of the company, really doesn't know anything about this either, and they need help. So the answer to the question is, we'll see. We're starting to see some things happen in the marketplace where CFOs, these named fiduciaries, are reaching out to other parties to help them figure out what matters most, what do we have to look at first, having a project plan, where are we most exposed. And remember, named fiduciaries have personal liability for doing this. So the stakes are really high here right now as it relates to this whole issue.
Well, fantastic. We've got about a minute left. What are your thoughts on, as we talk about advanced primary care, and you talk about these folks coming into Connecticut, the whole acquisition of physicians by these VC firms and others?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question. It's a big issue. I work with lots of doctors in health systems and what have you, and I will tell you that most of them right now don't like the owned system at all. Physicians got in to this to practice and to have great outcomes and relationships and what have you. And if you look, there's a lot of organizations around the country like Privia and Wellvana and Apollo and what have you that continue to give doctors their agency to practice in the way that they want to practice. They're providing them, importantly, with the data and analytics resources to be able to do many of the things that we just talked about, but they're also giving them quality of life. What does that mean? Instead of having a panel of 2,000 patients, no, by moving to this kind of neat integrated practice unit thing, maybe we can do a panel of 600 or 800 people. So I will tell you that there is a big movement, and I'm actually working with some provider groups, some legacy groups who are trying to align with these national organizations that will continue to give them agency over the practice of medicine.
Well, that's fantastic. A great discussion, Jeff. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And back to you, Greg.
And that is a wrap for today's enlightening episode. A big shout out to our dedicated listeners and a special thanks to Jeffrey Hogan, the dynamic president of Upside Health Advisors and co-founder of the Moving to Value Alliance. Stay connected with Jeff's groundbreaking work at www.theupsideeffect.com. If PopHealth Week resonates with you, show some love. Like our show on your favorite podcast platform, share the goodness, and hit that subscribe button. Catch us live on Healthcare Now Radio weekdays at 5:30 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And for our West Coast buddies, it's 2:30 a.m., 10:30 a.m., and 6:30 p.m. Pacific. From the heart of Pop Health Week, Fred Goldstein and yours truly, Greg Masters, we wish you wellness and safety. Until our next rendezvous, take care.